They destroy the Incan army, and then eventually they'll take over the empire. Now, life in the Spanish Empire is very different. And like I told you, we have this encomienda system. The Spanish needed people to rule over their new colonies in the Americas. These people were called viceroys. And what do you think a viceroy is similar to? Maybe a lord, like a lord in feudalism. Okay. The Native Americans were enslaved to work for the viceroys, mining gold, silver, but also they had farming. And disease, like I said, will run rampant. And when I say run rampant, I mean it's killing 90% of the population. We're going to go from 50 million Native Americans to 4 million Native Americans. And here's a picture of the natives working. Here's a picture of smallpox. This is something you will analyze later with your teacher. But I want you to keep this cartoon in your head. Now, many Spaniards were outraged by the treatment of natives. And what you need to think about is there's going to be a hierarchy. You're going to have the monarch, the Spanish monarch. You're going to have the viceroys, which are like lords. You're going to have the conquistadors, which are similar to the knights. And then you will have the natives, who are like serfs, working this land that they previously owned and lived on. But Spaniards are going to be outraged by the treatment of the natives. You have Bartolomé de las Casas, which was a Spanish historian. He's also a Dominican friar. And he's going to advocate for the use of Africans instead of natives. All right, so I know you're like, why is he? That's just as bad. But de las Casas had an idea. And what I would like for you to do for a second is just take a moment to yourself and analyze this painting. He is looking out into the sunset, and you can see these Native Americans working. He's writing there, which shows he has education. He's advocating for them. And then he has a native standing behind him, which is like symbolism of him supporting these natives, trying to protect them, and he does not want them to be treated unjustly. So he's an advocate. So you have to think about this painting is to show Bartolomé de las Casas in a great light, or showing that he was an advocate for the natives. But why African slaves? Why would you pick African slaves? Because the Europeans had interacted with Africans for hundreds and thousands of years through trade, and these African kings are willing to trade tribes that they have conquered. You have to remember, too, that African slaves had built up. Africans in general had immunities to the diseases that the Native Americans could not fight. So there's going to be the Treaty of Tordesillas. What you need to understand is that pretty much in 1494, the Pope is like, I'm going to draw a line down the world because the Spanish and Portuguese can't stop fighting. Everything to the west goes to the Spanish. Everything to the east goes to the Portuguese. And Brazil ultimately becomes Portugal's only colony in the Americas. And let me tell you why. Check out that line. If you look at the purple line, solid line right here, they were like, okay, Spain, you get all of this. Portugal, you get all of this. So if you look, who got gypped? Definitely Portugal, okay? Which, remember that they had settled Brazil anyway. So that's why Brazil is the only Portuguese-speaking nation in South America. Everybody else speaks Spanish. Mexico speaks Spanish. South America. And French colonies. When we talk about French colonies, they explored a lot of Canada. Instead of enslaving natives, though, they were very friendly to the natives. They actually traded furs with them. They even married Native American women during that time. And they would explore the Mississippi River and create a settlement in modern Louisiana, as well as Haiti, which we will talk about Haiti on Thursday because they're going to have a revolution in Haiti. And here's a picture of them trading furs with the natives. Now, Dutch colonies. The colonies did not send many colonists to America. The only Dutch colonies in America were set around the Hudson River in New York, because remember that Henry Hudson explored for the Dutch and he found that river. The Dutch were more preoccupied with the fact that they had a monopoly on trade in India, on the spice trade, so they were not really concerned about the Americas. They were kind of like, oh, this is great, but we're not really worried about this because we have a monopoly on the spice trade in India, and we're making a lot of money off of that. They also had colonies in South Africa during this time as well. And last but not least, English colonies. And what you need to remember about English colonies is, first of all, there's the lost colony that I know you learned about in 8th grade. It was backed by Sir Walter Raleigh, who was, the Queen supported him in his explorations, Elizabeth I. 150 men and women went to establish a colony. What's going to happen, though, is they're going to end up on Roanoke Island, and they're going to need supplies. And so John White, who's like the leader, sails to England to try to get supplies and help. what's going to happen while he's in England is that the Spanish-English war is going to break out, or the Anglo-Spanish War. And so he is not going to be able to get out of England for 3 years because of ships and battles and the Spanish Armada, and Philippe of Spain is trying to fight and conquer Elizabeth and make the nation Catholic and try to marry her and make England Catholic and take over for power. And so John White's kind of going to be on the struggle bus about getting back to the Roanoke civilization, or the colony. And he comes in 1590, he comes back, and there is no sign of the colonists except for the word Croatoan carved into a tree, or crow carved into a post. And what you need to understand is that it still remains a mystery today of what happened to these people, because they don't know if they got killed by the Native Americans, were killed by the Spanish who didn't like the English, or if they tried to build a ship and go on to return back to England. A lot of people think that they mixed with the Native Americans and created their own civilization, but they're not really sure. And so it still remains a mystery. And there's an awesome video that talks about the Lost Colony on here, and I know that your teacher will show it to you during this class period today. But it still remains a mystery. There's the link. So by 1607, though, the English do establish their first awesome, successful colony at Jamestown, Virginia, which in 2007, Queen Elizabeth I, I believe, visited Jamestown because it was settled by the English. But they were the first successful colony. Here's what it looks like. It's a little painting. Roughly 80% of the Jamestown settlers, though, they did die during the first winter in America. You have to remember that, guys, they're not used to the climate in America. The winters were harsh. They didn't have the lovely homes and cities that they were experiencing in England. They were living in, like cabins and whatnot, and were not prepared for the elements. By 1620, a group of settlers called the Pilgrims will sail over on the Mayflower from England, and they came to America to escape religious persecution. And they established a colony in Plymouth, Massachusetts, which I know you know the story of the Pilgrims and the Native Americans and the first Thanksgiving, but you need to remember that they came in 1620, and they were pilgrims, which they made a pilgrimage to another country to escape religious persecution. That's why they're called pilgrims. There's a picture right there. All right, very good, and that's the Conquest and Colonies. And we will pick up with a video on new patterns of trade later.